I'll probably cover how we look at industrial convergence driving technology convergence and driving behavior as a holistic stack out there. While it comes up there, and as I go into it, I'll talk of 2 or 3 use cases, very specific, which are IoT plus blockchain, and we'll see how each of these are driving digital as a philosophy, digital as a concept, and how we are seeing each of these enable very high value from an industry perspective, right? Okay, so two parts. I think how many of us really believe blockchain is here, and we need to really seriously give it a thought and a view on it? I mean, just a raise of hands quickly. Do you believe blockchain is here, and how many of you are working on blockchain in some form? Okay, okay, and how many of you have done POCs on use cases on blockchain? Anybody's worked on a blockchain stacks? Oh, great. Okay, so and you know, I'll focus a lot of my talk today on blockchain in non-financial industries. I'll look at things like you know, cold chain. Deepak just alluded to that. Probably we'll talk of a use case that we built with IoT and cold chain, and then we'll also, if we get time, talk a little bit more about use case around electric charging. Look at the electric cars, and how do you look at the utility sector disrupting because of blockchain. Are we okay with the slides there? If I look at specifically in terms of what are the challenges out there, right? Look at areas which are from an industry perspective, what are the business challenges? A lot of business industries changing. I think we looked at convergence of industries and industry sectors, look at front office, middle office, back office, across industries converging to create much higher cycle times, efficiencies, and values. On the other side, you're seeing a lot of global trends that we're seeing, which are challenges that businesses are facing today, right? One important aspect, and why we're seeing so much of rapid disruption today, is you're looking at a lot of codified trust. Blockchain is codified trust. You have 5G, which is codified connectivity. You've got marketplaces, which are codified. Most of the future wars probably are going to be software-based or codified wars, right? Now, if codification and software-based ecosystems are getting built and getting converged to create disruptions, what would that effectively lead to? Can I have the next slides? Look at pre-industrialization digital economy today, and the lower, we talk about the technologies out there. We're slowly entering, and with blockchain getting stabilized, blockchain getting more centralized to what we're trying to do out there, we can start looking at an economy with Internet of Experiences as a concept getting driven there. We're doing a lot of our current build-outs around that space in terms of how we can see AR, VR, MR, plus blockchain driving transactions in the process there, right? And at every stage, we've seen a lot of shift in how technology is driving most of these adoptions. And at this point of time, I think the whole story is flipping towards a business and business needs and business challenges driving technology backwards, and that converges as we go along. Next slide. We'll talk about so basically we look at blockchain disrupting the whole financial ecosystem by removing and disintermediating the entire ecosystem out there. Now let's look at other business out there, right? Whether it's suppliers, consumers, yeah, stay there, right? And each of, like another good slide where you can look at whether it's cost takeout, whether it's initial phases of blockchain is going to be all about cost takeout. You're going to see a lot of processes getting converged, collapsed, new digital processes getting created, and you're looking at that convergence of records getting into value creation and into capex releases as you go along. Interesting slide to my question of are we seeing blockchain as a market traction across industries? I think very strongly talks about that. Move on to the next slide. Right, we can skip this. Go ahead. Next. Another interesting slide. Look at relative rate of adoption, and I'm trying to give different views of analysts out here. What you saw out there initially was one, we're seeing HFS talking specifically about some of the adoption trends out here and value realizations across each of those. I'll probably go to the use case quickly. Next. Right. Another very interesting slide. This is a blockchain 101. You could get it on the net, where each of those use cases across, right? You're looking at multiple areas where blockchain is actually disrupting. I'll take specifics, 2 or 3 of them, and go into details on where we've worked on. These are all market slides I've looked at. Next one. Right? Look at 6 categories of blockchain use cases. One is the record keeping aspect of it, where you can use a lot of the blockchain aspects to provenance and look at those areas. Look at transactions in the second category, where you look at using things like trust and transactions and disintermediation coming in and driving a lot more impact out there. And examples are there, whether it is cross-border peer-to-peer payments, insurance claims in the transaction category, which you can look at. And many of these are in an advanced stage of either POC pilots, and some of them are trending towards going production, right? The whole identity fraud, provenance in terms of sovereign identity, looking at voting is another good example of record keeping for a blockchain out there specifically, right? We can move on, next slide, right? A very interesting slide. I'll probably leave it for your records. You could read it through, but about 50+ use cases right here across about 14 states in India. We're looking at blockchain being adopted under different scenarios here, right? Top 3 are land registry, farm insurance, and digital certificates. I think it's there. Whether it's going to stay and sustain in the same form, or we're going to look at different forms of disintermediation and record keeping and digital trust and codified trust coming in, we'll probably evaluate it, and we'll see it next couple of quarters. Next slide. Transaction registry and of tradable information. Again, you look at, and Deepak spoke about it, look at creating new markets. You can redistribute markets, or you can streamline existing processes, whether it's all the way from new product introduction to keeping records to taking out cost. You can see that entire spectrum is fairly big and fairly wide, right? And across each of these, and whether it's energy trading, central bank digital currency areas, we'll talk about P2P electric charging. I'll probably go into more details of that in my subsequent areas. Next slide. I'll probably have to go through some of those. I kept as some of backups just for, but I'll go through anyways. So again, transactions. You look at top 10 transactions. You've got trade finance, transaction settlements at the top end of it. We've got energy settlements. We'll talk more about it. Supply chain, custody tracking, asset tracking. All of these are showing substantial non-banking based use cases across for us, right? Next slide. Yeah, we'll probably spend a bit of time on this. Look at, this is the use case. Primarily, we looked at how we can use immutability, trust, collaborative architecture, automation, and transparency as benefits out of this entire POC that was built for a customer. Now, we're looking at, a lot of these electric cars move from long distances. They have multiple stations that probably they need to go and charge their and there is no network, there's no one ecosystem out there for charging each of these electric cars. Today, electric charge will probably run for a couple of hours, maybe a couple of 100 kilometers or less than that, right? Now, can you look at blockchain allowing us to charge anywhere, anytime, any amount, and be able to pay a single invoice at the end of the month to all the respective parties and distributing back there, right? This can go on to looking at a use case for things like machine talking to each other, right? Selling energy back to the grid, and looking at 2 electric cars communicating, talking to each other on various other parameters and making payments for it. We spoke of earlier the individual identity and your data being sold or being traded for some value out there. Can vehicles or fixed assets trade value with another machine, and machines become more transactable in the process there, right? A very strong concept out there, smart contracts running live there, ledger data, drivers again, whether user-driven economy, looking at counterplay transactions becoming with previous. So the whole concept of trust coming in without a governing body trying to monitor control or supervise or govern the entire transaction out there, right? A lot of this, I'll share a link where some more detailed use cases are there at the end of my talk on the it's a Forbes Insight that you can look at, right? We'll probably go to next use case, right? Look at cold chain logistics. Like, if I look at specifically in terms of pharmaceutical industry, or even if you look at transporting human live organs across, right? IoT can collect shock and vibration, it can collect temperature, it can collect tampering, it can collect geolocation data from that. Now, when you collect all of the data using IoT sensors, which are embedded onto that particular pellet or pharmaceutical container or storage ecosystems out there, you can sell that centrally into a system, and any tampering and a blockchain can sort of track each of those records, be able to give us a lot more real-time or near real-time feed on if that particular product is adhered to all the cold chain parameters in transit. And many of these transits are happening across hundreds of kilometers across multiple days, right? Now, there are two ways, and some of you who are researching on blockchain, a lot of data on blockchain. Today, if you look at Bitcoin itself does about 7 transactions per second, right? Ethereum does about 20 transactions per second. The banking systems do much larger, much higher. Now, if you look at cold chain as an example, right, and I would love to debate out with you after my talk out here. There are instances when you want to track data. So you're assuming when you're doing a blockchain-like environment, if there's any outlier, any event that occurs, you want to track that, store that, record that, make it immutable, and make it provenance ready for people to audit, to govern, to regulate, and to authorize and approve eventually. You're assuming that at other points of time, data was not, there was no outlier in that event. There was no temperature variation. There was no tampering of the product, right? Now, can we look at a blockchain continuously taking data from a system, maybe every 5 minutes, every 1 minute, every geo shift of location of latitude, longitude, feed it into the blockchain, make that a continuous record, right? That's another interesting area that you can look at and think about. Benefits are huge. Looking at blockchain right out here, whether it's monitoring, reporting, documenting availability, and when the actual pharmaceutical product or the organ gets used in a hospital environment or at a point of sale, at a retail point, we are able to actually go back and confirm and confidently allow the system to use those organs and equipments and devices as we go along. We can move on to the next slide, right? What are the challenges out here? I'll spend probably a minute out here, right? Because look at, we're hearing a lot of new words today. I think in the earlier, we spoke of friends becoming enemies, right? I think the earlier person spoke of, right? If you look at blockchain itself, the collaboration becomes very important, and collaborating to share data, collaborating to be able to use data and leverage an ecosystem, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's banking, whether it's healthcare, whether it is systems around manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, management, right? Probably that's one of the biggest roadblocks of looking at how we can look at blockchain evolving in the next couple of years and going large-scale production. Standards, I think, again, are critical. Looking at how industry standards can evolve and what we can do to make blockchain become far more acceptable by across the portfolio out there. Regulatory and legal frameworks, a lot of work happening around that space, whether it's looking at all the way from 5G onwards into AI being regulated, into blockchain itself getting regulated, and the larger regulation ecosystems actually being able to contribute and add value to whether you can actually the provenance aspects of it being driven out there. Latency is big. We spoke about it earlier on also, where multiple transactions need to be defined rapidly and driven across different use cases. I can talk some concluding thoughts out here, right? Whether it is India is big. If you're looking at India from an implementation perspective, we're seeing a lot of tractions out there. And some scenarios, again, from a use case perspective, look at, we looked at, earlier on, we looked at a girl-child education where a lot of NGOs and government funds get delivered and get consumed for educating girl children. So whether the child continues the education or not is a very strong ecosystem out there. And a blockchain can fix that problem very, very well, where it can come in and only milestone-based or activity-based or task-based events can be looked at. And fund releases from an NGO or from a government ecosystem can happen only based on a particular child completing its education for that particular year. Commitments to projects over 20 billion, I think we looked at that. We're taking track of 90 plus use cases right now in terms of various industries. Across loyalty programs, B2C side, across healthcare side, across manufacturing areas, and what we can look at in terms of the banking side, right? Now, what else, right?
This is Ashish from Envision Financial Systems. My question is, how successful has blockchain been in fintech industry? What's the rate of adoption, and what sort of future we can expect?
Yeah, so I think in fintech, concepts of blockchain, I think are no-brainers. I'm sure whether it is the India market itself, looking at how India is innovating in the fintech space, right? Looking at the UPIs and rupees and how they will come back and disrupt what we're doing out there. Versus Bitcoin is just an example of what started. I'm sure the whole banking ecosystem will get disrupted and disintermediated way differently. And a lot of banks, I'm sure, when some of the banking folks spoke on earlier, the adoption is one part, potential is second part. I think potential is huge. Adoption is, we spoke of the constraints, whether it is the cooperation part of it, the regulations part of it. Technology is there. Technology can solve most of this, benefits and value today. It's, I think, the larger ecosystem actually coming together and uplifting that adoption out there. We can look at every segment, whether it is the front office side of the banking ecosystem or fintech ecosystem, the middle office and the back office areas.
You had shown where in India that multiple states are there and all of them are doing in blockchain and all that. So this is now recognized at the state government level as well as at the, overall country level. So we see these challenges where you have said that about the standardization, compliance issues and all that. So like GST, we have one nation, one tax. Can't we have like one nation, one blockchain regulation or something like that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, but I think it eventually could lead there. I think I would leave it there. Maybe that's a way to look at governments owning and building it. So maybe that's a good point you brought, actually, because I think that's exactly how large-scale adoption start happening. Governments will probably, they probably have a more of a cost center. Any cost center is going to probably look at blockchain very differently and trying to regulate it and build one entity across everybody. So all the government funds can actually go in that path and create one blockchain across all states and run it out. I think each of those records today are taking different technology stacks, different consensus mechanisms to go back and deliver and create value out there.